Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing another episode of our Planet Zoo kind of DLC looks. So we're going to have a look now through the DLC pack, the Oceania Pack. One I've been quite excited for since it's been announced. It's because there's a lot of animals that I've been around and animals that live where I live. So quite excited to get stuck into this one. So, yeah, really awesome pack. Comes with like the Polynesian theme, which is really awesome. But we're not going to talk about too much about that. We're going to be talking about some of the wonderful animals coming to this pack. So we're going to do kind of the typical thing. We're just going to go through the animal, talk about it, and then have a look at the Zoopedia. And yeah, typical. It's not too much different. But yeah, we're going to be starting off today with our exhibit animal, or walkthrough exhibit animal. We've got the spectacled flying fox. So let's have a look at one in the camera, exhibit camera. So here's one here. Definitely a cutie. So this is the spectacled flying fox, or is also known as the spectacled fruit bat. These guys are a type of megabat, like a type of flying fox or fruit bat, that live in... Let's see if we can find one in a interesting position, maybe flying around or something soon. But they live in the northeastern regions of Australia, like around Queensland, but also found in New Guinea and some offshore islands, like Wardlark Island and Kirwana, I believe you say that. And they're really cool. Their head to body length for these guys is about 22 to 25 centimeters, with the forearm being 60 80 centimeters, and weigh about 400 grams to about a kilogram. And the larger ones, you can see they've got pale yellow or straw-colored fur around their face there, where they get their name spectacled, since they look like they're wearing glasses, as you're going to see that there. And the mantle is black-yellow around, and then they have some pale faces and things like that. So really cool. So these guys are forest dwellers. So as I mentioned, they live around New Guinea and Queensland. They definitely love living in rainforests. And that's their preferred habitat. They prefer to roost in upper canopies and in the full sun. And colonies can be found in rainforests, mangroves, eucalypt forests, and paperback forests. And there've actually been increasing evidence of urbanization. So these guys can be found in urban areas. They are adapting well, especially areas with lots of fruit trees, where they obviously what they eat, since that's in their name. So diet, the wild diet for these guys is like rainforest fruits, riparian flowers, and different like eucalyptus flowers and figs and things like that. So they're very much adapted for eating like flowers and fruits, so very sweet things, where they get the name fruit bat. So in terms of their life cycle, these guys have one pup annually, and females are actually capable of breeding from their first year of age. Males typically don't breed until they're 3 or 4 though, and they are polygamous, similar to other flying fox species, and they can be found in ratios of either 2 to 1, so 2 females to a male. Copulation or mating or conception usually occurs between April to May, and sexual activity can be from about January to June. And females will give birth to one pup in October to December, and the babies are nursed over about 5 months or so, and are weaned within these colonies, and then they'll fly out until they often can bring back, and then they're brought back to the colony kind of as they go out to forage and then come back, feed their baby, do things like that. And then eventually the babies kind of are weaned off and taught to fly, and they just become a part of the colony. So in terms of their life expectancy, these guys typically can live quite a long time for a bat, about 12 to 15 years. In captivity, they could live up to 30 years, or over 30 years. And in the wild, they can be preyed upon animals like pythons and owls, but also crocodiles. Death by ticks is another big thing, and their babies when they're born too early in the winter, or something goes wrong with them fetal development. And they're also killed, sadly, in a lot of human-related accidents, so things like power lines, nets, and wires. And it's thought that because of that, wild flying foxes might live slightly shorter lives. So yeah, they're sadly endangered. They're listed as a threatened species, and they're considered vulnerable because of the loss of their habitat, and also things, as I mentioned, like getting hit with road lines and nets, not roads, but power lines and nets and things like that. That can be a big issue for them as well. Also, there was a severe heat wave that considered them endangered. Because of that heat wave, their population would have declined a lot. So there's permits to allow farmers to like cull them to protect their crops. Obviously, can't do too much. But now this has been banned. And in February 2019, they were actually delisted from vulnerable to endangered because of those mass die-offs. And it's believed that 20,000 individuals died in this die-off, so they're a little bit worried about these guys. But still really cool. Definitely nice to see these animals, and nice to see them represented in the game, since they are endangered, of course. So let's have a look at the Zoopedia. So you can see spectacled fox, pretty much we mentioned, estimated 44,000 in Australia. I don't know about other locations. And you can see their range here. So they live in northern Queensland and go into those areas. And then you can see around New Guinea and those forests around there. So quite a wide range. Population 3 to 35. Typical dominant males who claim the more variable roosts and more females. 80 centimeter wingspan. Life expectancy is about 16 and a half years on average, but I mentioned they could live up to 30 in captivity. About 750 grams on average, which is quite big. As I mentioned, they went 400 to a kilogram, so quite big. Age of sexual maturity is about 3 years. That's for more of a male. Females can breed in their first year. Sexual release is about 11 years. One pup per mating event. Incubation period is about 4 months. At the birth, 8 months. And average to breed in captivity. So some facts. They can live in colonies of up to 50,000, so that's pretty big. That's pretty much the entire population of Australia, so I imagine it wasn't in Australia. Spectacled flying foxes are extremely social and are known to get depressed and are aggressive when kept alone, so they are very social species. They're quite important seed dispersers, so a lot of other species like agoutis and other big herbivores, these guys are quite important for dispersing those seeds, with a single bat carrying up to 60,000 seeds a night. And unlike other bats, these guys don't rely on echolocation. That's why they have kind of big dog-like eyes and faces, because they have great vision. And non-pregnant spectacled flying foxes will surround pregnant females to protect them and assist the babies with providing them food, which is quite cool, and obviously help the mother as well. And being these guys, they don't live with the European bats, so they don't really live in there, so you can't mix the species, but still really, really cool. Nice to see another bat. So, next up, we're going to have a look at a cool little animal from New Zealand and Australia. We have got the little blue penguin. Cute little guys here. How can you not love these little guys? So, the little blue penguin, this is Eupilla minor. So there's potentially 2 species of these guys, but I'll get into that soon. They are also known as the fairy penguin, or the little blue penguin, or just blue penguins. So it's either a variation of little blue or fairy, pretty much. I'll have a look at you later. I don't want to have a look at you while you're getting into the burrow. So there you are. Look at this little cutie. Look at you go. So these guys are kind of typically described. They were described by German naturalist Johann Rowland Foster in 1781. And there's several subspecies were described, but now there's just the 2, which could be 2 different species. There's the Australian, or fairy penguin, you gotta say, the Nova Hollandiae, which is the Australian one, which lives around the southern coast of Australia and potentially in Otago, which is weird distribution. But the mainly one that you find around New Zealand and the islands around New Zealand, except Otago, would be this species here, the minor one. So, yeah, minor, so that's kind of the one you see there. But there is evidence that there could be potentially 2 species, either 2 subspecies, 2 species. It's taxonomy being taxonomy. There's nothing really set in stone. But I would say because of this white thing on their flipper here, they're white flipper penguins, so they would correctly, if you had the 2 species, that'd be Nova Hollandiae, so because that is also called the white flipper penguin. So that's kind of if it was the correct one or the double species taxonomy, this would be the white flipper penguin or the Nova Hollandiae, which is quite interesting. But these guys are quite similar to most other penguins, quite well adapted for swimming. They've got the big flippers there, the wings are turned into flippers. Got that smooth coat, but these guys have got web feet as well, and they're really, really cute. They've got that blue color to them. They typically are the smaller species of penguin. They get to about 30 to 33 centimeters tall, about 12 to 13 inches, and weigh about 1.5 kilograms on average. And you can see their top side is quite shiny, blue in color, and they're counter-shaded, so their bottom is quite white. And their flipper's also blue as well. And they have quite a long lifespan. The average for the species is about 6.5 years, but some experiments have shown that some, like banding and flipper banding kind of surveys show that these guys can potentially live up to 25 years in extreme cases. And quite interesting, there are some behavioural differences between the New Zealand and the kind of white flipper penguins, as you could say. These slight behavioural differences. The Australian ones will come out at dusk and walk in nesting sites, while the New Zealand lineage doesn't have this ability, because the Australian ones have to deal with marsupials, which is interesting. And the ones from Australia will double brood because they have to deal with more predators because of being in Australia. New Zealand doesn't have quite as many large carnivorous predators as Australia does, so they do a little bit to adapt to that. But they're quite wide distributions. They can be found across New Zealand and its neighbouring islands, so like the Chatham Islands, and things like that. And then you have the Australasian ones, so they have been seen in around all parts of Southern Australia, like around Tasmania, around southern parts like that, Western Australia, so quite a wide range. But yeah, there have been vagrants like seen in Chile and South Africa, so that's really, really interesting. So in terms of their behavior, in terms of their feeding, these guys will eat anything that's pretty small, so like small fish, small crustaceans, and small cephalopods, or small squids and things like that. And these guys will actually travel and dive quite extensively to find that food. And quite important examples of prey for these guys include arrow squid, slender sprat, graham's gudgeon, red cod, and aruru, as we say that. Quite cool. And there's sadly, I believe they're actually considered endangered. Yeah, no, they're least concerned. But there are a lot of threats to these guys, especially around New Zealand and Australia. Well, Australia they're not doing too bad, but mainly New Zealand. Threats to these guys is basically imported predators. So in New Zealand, there's a lot of introduced animals like stoats and ferrets and possums and cats are really bad issues in Australia because they will hunt and eat in Australia and New Zealand. Uh, they will hunt these guys while they're in their burrows and eat them. In New Zealand, it's a pretty bad issue because they didn't have any terrestrial predators to adapt to, mammalian predators that they needed to adapt to, so they kind of don't have the behaviors to avoid these guys. But yeah, that's a big issue, like dogs as well. Dog attacks are a pretty bad issue. Oil spills is a big thing for penguins as well. These guys suffer from that. In Australia, they do have invasive species that can prey on penguins, so like foxes and things like that. Foxes and cats and things like that. But another big issue as well is that there was one island where Tasmanian devils, an animal that's actually in this pack, was introduced and kind of wiped out a penguin colony. And people are like, oh, no, no, no. But in reality, it's kind of would have been natural. But obviously, the penguins living on the island weren't quite adapted to the pressures of the devils that were introduced as a conservation measure because we want to get as many devils off Tasmania as possible because of that facial tumor disease. So it's a big issue for these guys, but really, really cute. And but we'll talk about oil spills a bit. There was an oil spill of the Rena, which happened in 2011, killed about 2,000 seabirds and actually killed about a few little penguins. And it was estimated 20,000 birds in total were impacted by the wider ecosystem. And these guys are often caught and put in, well, not caught, but found, injured, and rescued by wildlife hospitals and things like that, like the Dunedin one, for example, and there's Bird Care Aotearoa that has them. But yeah, really, really cool. They're considered in New Zealand by at-risk declining, so they are considered least concern generally because they're doing quite well. But in areas like New Zealand, they are declining because of these threats like oil spills, invasive species. In Australia, they are too, but they've got such a wide range, they are doing okay. But in terms of zoological exhibits, they're typically, a lot of zoos in Australia have them, like Adelaide Zoo, Perth Zoo, Taronga Zoo as well. In New Zealand, we have Auckland Zoo, Wellington Zoo, and their national aquarium have them as well. I actually applied for a job there, which is quite interesting. And they also exist in SeaWorld, where they have some penguins, and most of them are rescues, so they're rescued penguins that have been injured or for whatever reason can't be released into the wild, so they're taken into these zoos. And in the United States, there are some zoos with them. The Bronx Zoo, Louisville, and Cincinnati Zoo have them. But yeah, really, really cool animals. How can you not love these cute little penguins? I really do love these guys. Let's see if we can spot a baby. There should be a baby in here. So here is a little baby penguin. How cute are these little guys? How adorable. Love these cute little guys. Little baby penguins. But yeah, these guys, typical with their breeding, these guys will come onto land. They often live in mated pairs for life. They'll have a burrow and they'll go into that burrow and take turns going in and out of the burrow and feeding their chick. Very similar to most other species of penguins. But yeah, really, really cool. So let's have a look at their Zoopedia. So their Zoopedia here, little blue penguin, we mentioned that there. You can see their range all across New Zealand, parts of eastern and western Australia, mainly during the south. You can see around Tasmania as well. So quite a wide range. Group size, you can see quite big groups, about 6 to 500 in the groups. You can have a lot of penguins. Probably too much for most computers to handle. And they are monogamous, so they'll mate for life, and they'll have their babies in their burrows, things like that. Very typical of most of the penguins. They're quite gregarious, so that means they all kind of live in groups together. Pretty good in that regard. Relationship with humans are neutral, and guests can enter the habitat, though most zoos wouldn't let you because spread of disease and all that. Size, you can see there, about a foot tall, 30 centimeters. Life expectancy is about 20 years. They probably live a lot longer in captivity than they do in the wild since they are a prey species. And weight about 1.3 kilograms. So yeah, that sounds about right. Age of sexual maturity is about 3 years. They can have babies till they're 10 years old. Typically have 1 to 2 babies per mating event, which is probably true in the wild. Incubation is about a month. Interbirth period is about 12 months. And quite easy to breed in captivity, so that's pretty good. So yeah, status. As I mentioned, they are the smallest species penguin in the world, and they each have a unique call, and monogamous pairs will use these calls to identify each other, which is pretty cute. And like most of the penguins, they have an oily substance. They excrete it from their tails and rub it over their bodies to maintain their feathers. And they're quite good travelers. You see, they may travel 1,000 kilometers before its first birthday, and they can dive up to depths of 60 meters, which is quite deep for a little penguin. So it's a penguin that's half a meter tall diving down to 60 meters. So yeah, really, really great. Well, let's see if you can spot this. Is this going to be a little animation here? Or are they going to? But yeah, really, really cute. Definitely love these guys. Awesome, awesome addition. So next up, we've got another really cute animal. We've got the quokka. So this is one from Australia. I can love these little guys. So the quokka, these guys are a small macropod. So they're related to wallabies and kangaroos and all them. They're about the size of a domestic cat, and they are in the genus Centaurix. And like other macropods, they are herbivorous, and they are mainly nocturnal. So in terms of description, they get about 2.5 to 5 kilograms, or about 5 to 11 pounds, at about 40 to 54 centimeters, or about 16 to 21 inches long, and they have about a 30 centimeter or 12-inch long tail, which is actually quite short for a macropod, which is interesting. Quite stocky, with well-developed hind legs, and they have a short, broad head. And it actually seems that these guys were originally adapted for walking on land, but then as it evolved, it kind of became built for a little bit more climbing, which is quite interesting. And even though they look very much like a small kangaroo, they can climb. They can climb into like shrubs and things up to about a meter tall, 1.5 meters tall, I mean. And they have quite coarse fur, as you can see, that's kind of brown with bluff underneath as well. And they can live up to about 10 years on average. They're also nocturnal, so they typically like to sleep during the day and come out at night. And also they are polygamous, so they have a very interesting mating system in that regard. So let's have a look at the cute little babies while we talk about that. Oh, that's not a baby. This is a baby, a little rat. How cute. After a month of gestation, the females, because they are marsupial, they give birth to a joey, and the females can give birth about twice a year and produce 17 joeys during her lifespan. The joey will live in her mother's pouch for about 6 months. Is he going to go in the pouch? Cute little animation. Needs to go in that pouch. And relies on their mother's milk once they've come out of the pouch for about 2 more months until they're fully weaned at about 8 months of age. Female sexual maturity reach about 18 months, and when a female joey is in a pouch and pursued by predators, may actually drop the baby on the ground, and the joey will produce noises that will produce the mother's attention, reduce the attention away from its mother, and allow the mother to escape. So it's a little bit sad, just drop the baby, but being marsupials, they can produce so many. It's not going to be a big loss for her. She can just make another one. A little bit rough for the little baby quokka, but still very much a cutie. The quokka, or the quokka, is pronounced Quokka, and is from the local Aboriginal word, the Nogonal word, which is quite interesting. And in terms of ecology, during the Pleistocene, these guys were more abundant, so they would have lived on open landscapes. But since humans arrived in Australia, they introduced new species of plant and animals, so dealing with mainly predators like foxes and cats is a big thing for these guys. But now they're sadly restricted to basically the southern west part of Australia, and Rosnet Island is one large population exists, but they used to be much more common. And there's some isolated populations in the mainland parts of Western Australia, but they are, for the most part, pretty much all declining, which is very, very sad, which makes them an endangered species. Because of red foxes and cats, they're only really thriving in those areas without them, so like Rosnet Island is a great example. And I mentioned is they like to climb, and they like to like hanging out in Acrocarpus plants, which are quite prickly. But they can adapt to many different habitats, so that's quite good. As long as we've got rid of the cats and foxes, that'd be fine. So in terms of their diet, they eat many types of vegetation, like most other macropods, so they feed on grasses, sedges, and leaves. And one of their favourite plants is called Guanolochi ledifronda, which is a small scrub species, which is one of their favourites. And people that visit Rosnet Island because they want to see the quokka because they give like a cute little smile, cute little selfies. They're not encouraged to feed them because, or give them any sort of human food because it can cause malnourishment and hurt them in terms of their health. But they do have a high water requirement, but they have a lack of fresh water on Rosnet Island, so they supplement that with eating a lot of vegetation. And on the mainland, they can only live in areas with 600 millimeters or 24 inches of rain per year. And actually will chew their cud quite similar to cows. So that's really cool in that regard. So in terms of their population, as I mentioned, they were widespread before colonization. So they would have lived around the southwestern part of Western Australia, including a couple offshore islands. But because of that logging and the introduction of foxes and cats, their population declined greatly. So there's now estimated only about 4,000 quokkas living on mainland Australia and about 8 to 12,000 living on Rosnet Island. And pretty much every population except the Rosnet 1 is declining. And on Rosnet, they still have to deal with snakes. But for the most part, they're doing okay on that island. And they've also seen quite significant declines as well. So they are considered vulnerable, since there's still a lot of them, but their range is quite restricted. And where they live on the mainland they're declining. So there's a lot of efforts to try and protect these guys as we get into this conservation. So that's why they are considered threatened. A big issue, things like climate change, as the habitats change, they might not be able to adapt, and also Rosnet could probably go underwater, so it's not a good thing as well. Things like wildfires as well as kind of a big issue. But a lot of people like them because they're so cute and they're not too scared of people. So people travel to Rosnet Island where they can take selfies with them. It's kind of become a little bit of a thing, but people have also started feeding them as well, so that's not a really good thing. It's called Quokka selfies. And people like them. It's a bit of a trend. Famous people like Shawn Mendes, Margot Robbie, and Chris Hemsworth have kind of done that. But that has caused more tourists on the island, which is both a good and bad thing. More money to go into conservation, and that's more people leaving their rubbish and disturbing the poor quokkas. But yeah. And that's why they're called the world's happiest animal, but sadly they're on the risk of extinction. But they have actually been in captivity a little bit. There are some zoos, especially around Australia, that have them. And there are I believe there's one zoo in Europe that has them, but for the most part, really only in Australian zoos. And typically, there was a study that showed that fewer animals remain visible from visitor paths when open walkthrough exhibits. And they typically try to avoid visitors because it can be quite stressful. So if you're going to go to Rosnet Island or go through a walkthrough with these guys, just remember they are animals that are quite shy. So just keep your distance and try not to stress them out too much. But yeah, really, really cool. So let's have a look at the... Oh, that's not what we wanted to do. That's not a problem. A bit of a shambles today. But anyway, here is we'll have a look at the Zoopedia. It's a little zoopedia here. So wild population is about 7,000 to 15,000. We already talked about that. So you can see that was their former range in a couple islands, but that's pretty much their former range. Social group 1 to 24, so about 23 males, 23 females. The larger males are typical dominant, promiscuous, gregarious, so they can all mature offspring can tolerate being together in a group. Confident with humans and guests can enter the habitat, but in real life you probably wouldn't want to do that because they can get a bit stressed. Size 48 to 46 centimeters tall. Males are slightly bigger. 10 years of age for these guys, and 3.45 for the males and 2.4 for the females. So the males are slightly bigger. Age of sexual maturity is about the first year. That's about right. Babies till they die. 1 baby per mating event. Incubation period is about 7 months, and the interbirth period is about 5 months, and quite easy to breed in captivity. So they have their small jaws and protruding teeth that always look like they're smiling, so that's why they're quite famous. They do not fear humans, but they have a curiosity, and this, as they don't have natural predators, they lack that instinctive fearfulness, and that has led quokka selfies being quite popular. So that's part of the reason they're probably added quite popular. Most of the quokka's predators are introduced species like dingoes, foxes, domestic dogs, and cats. Quokka females may actually abandon their joy. I mentioned that. The main habitat, Rosnet Island, was named by the Dutch explorer, and it translates to Rat's Nest Island because they believe quokkas were giant rats, but they're little wallabies and really, really cute, and they can share their habitat with emus, so that's quite interesting. Another cool animal to add in the game. And look at these cute little babies. Definitely very, very cute. Definitely love these guys. So yeah, we're going to be moving on now. We've got another really cool animal. So next up we have got second to last, but definitely not least. I don't know why I said least, but love these guys. These are Tasmanian Devils, an animal that everyone has wanted for quite a long while. So these guys are a type of carnivorous marsupial, and were until recently just found in Australia, but they have been introduced into Australia and a few reserves and things like that. So really, really cool. So in terms of their description, these guys are actually the largest surviving carnivorous marsupial, with the extinction of the thylacine, very regretfully. And you can see they've got quite thick bodies and large heads, as you're going to see there. Very interesting look to them, and a long tail. And unusual for a marsupial, their front legs are actually longer than their back legs. And they can run up to 13 kilometers an hour. And you can see they've got quite a dark black fur with these like kind of white stripes and patches along their rump and along their shoulders and chest there, which is quite interesting. And male devils are usually larger than females on average, so they get on average about 25 inches or about 65 centimeters in length, with a 25 centimeter or about 10-inch tail, and they get to an average weight of about 8 kilograms, or females get about an average of about 6 kilograms. So, although Western Tasmanian devils tend to be a little bit smaller, they have 5 toes, as you can see, with each with claws. Really, really interesting. Those little hands, and they're quite stocky, and they have a lower center of mass. So they get to their fully grown of age about 2 years old, and they can live. A few devils live longer than 5 years in the wild, but they can live about 7 years in captivity. So not quite long lived. Very much marsupials kind of grow up really fast, so they don't live more than pretty much 5 to 7 years, even in captivity. And they can store body fat in their tail, and healthy devils have pretty fat tails. And they can move quite quickly, and they have a scent gland on the base of the tail that actually makes a strong scent that they can use for communicate, things like that. They also have a pouch that faces backwards, as they are a marsupial. They'll have babies in that pouch. Another cool fact about these guys, they've got long whiskers, things like that, and have a well-defined saddle kind of in their kind of pouch and things like that, and they have the strongest black and white. They have highly carnivorous dentition, so they've got a really strong bite force. They actually have the most powerful bite force of any mammalian carnivore for their body size. So they can have 56 kgs for kind of a really small 8 kilo mammals. It's quite impressive, and they have quite powerful jaws that are actually quite similar to hyenas. So that's another great example of convergent evolution that they use to break up bones and things like that, and are quite good at that. They're actually able to attack wombats that are up to 30 kilograms, so they can kill quite big things. That's really, really awesome. So prehistorically, they lived all across Australia pretty much, but now they're limited to kind of Tasmania and Robbins Island, so that's where they lived. And they have been late introduced into mainland Australia through Aussie Ark around New South Wales. Their population believed to be doing a well KK near now. But they did used to live about 3,000 years ago. They lived on mainland Australia but went extinct there, probably because of more climate change, it's believed. Though dingoes could have played a factor because that's about the time dingoes came to Australia. Yeah, really, really cool. They are quite important for the ecosystem of Tasmania. They are nocturnal and crepuscular, so they either come out at night or during dawn and dusk. So these guys are kind of... Young devils can climb trees, but adults can't. So these guys will kind of climb around and then run around in the night looking for prey to scavenge on, or even hunting themselves. They do not form packs, but they spend most of the time alone weaned. They're solitary, but they do often will kind of hang out with each other. They'll interact and things like that within their habitat. And they also are characterized during the mating season. They'll become most commonly kind of interact with each other, but mainly males will only interact really with other males. And they do have a home range, and in a period of 2 to 4 weeks, it can vary between 4 to 27 kilometers. And that can depend on, obviously, distribution of food, like things like that. Particularly, they like to eat like things like wallabies and paddy melons. And they use dens that are regularly. They'll use dens formerly owned by wombats, especially mothers. There's maternity dens, they'll use that. But they'll often kind of find their own dens and things like that. And a big issue with habitat degradation has kind of affected that as well. And while they are kind of similar size of anatomy of other dasyurids, which is the group of carnivorous marsupials these guys belong to, these guys have a little bit of a cooler body temperature, and they actually can spike quite a bit, depending on where they're raised, especially humidity, things like that, which is quite interesting. So it's another adaptation for them to live in warmer and cooler areas. And in terms of feeding, these guys can take prey up to the size of a small kangaroo, but in practice they're typically opportunistic, feed on carrion. But they will hunt things like wombats, bettongs, and potoroos, even things like mammals, small mammals like sheep and rabbits they'll eat. Penguins they'll eat, and fruit and vegetables, tadpoles, frogs, and reptiles they'll eat. But because of the extinction of the thylacine, it's believed that these guys would have ate juvenile thylacines when the mothers were away from their dens. But they can actually feed on anything. They've actually been proven that these guys can actually impact cats. So populations where devils live, that's why there's not many cats in Tasmania. They kind of get rid of the number or help lower the number of cats in the local area. So that's part of the reason why people wanting to reintroduce them into Australia, but also because of, as I'll get to, their conservation issues. But yeah, they're quite good at eating a lot of roadkill and things like that. Very famous for that, and they can, because of their strong bite, they can get rid of those carcasses and eat them up. But they mainly eat the smaller mammals, so things like wallabies and paddy melons and battongs. But they will feed on pretty much any other carrion they can find. They're seafood eaters, so they'll seafood, they eat it. And they will hunt alone, but there have been some people complain that they'll hunt socially, so attacking other animals and things like that. So quite cool. And lots of studies into their feeding as well. But now we're going to talk about their reproduction. See if we can find this little cutie here. Little baby Joey, little cutie sitting out like that. Really, really awesome. So they typically start to breed when they reach sexual maturity, which is about their second year, and then they become fertile about once a year while they're in heat. And that is typically when prey is most abundant in spring and early summer. And then occurring in March, the mating will take place in like shelters and things like that, and the female come mate. They'll ovulate 3 times, and they're not monogamous, so females will mate with several males if they're not guarded by another male. So they are kind of often will be guarded. And often will keep the males will often keep their mates in custody in their den, or take them along if they need to drink. So that basically makes sure that the babies that they have is theirs. And they can produce up to 16 offspring over their lifetime, with females averaging 4 mating seasons and 12 offspring. But theoretically, this means the devil population can double on an annual basis, but makes up for their high mortality. So, because of, as I mentioned, issues kind of like roadkill and this facial tumor disease is another big thing for these guys. Gestation lasts only about 21 days, but they are kind of give birth to 20 to 30 young standing up, each weighing like 0.18 of a gram, so really, really small. And then they climb up into their mother's pouch, and that's where they go. And the young could be called pups, joeys, or imps. And the young are born, they kind of climb into their mother's pouch and trying to feed on the nipples in there. And then they kind of grow up. And inside the pouch, they will develop quickly. And they begin to form, their body forms. And then I believe the young kind of come out the first time they get their full coat in 90 days. And then kind of will come out there. They also have the vibrissae, or these kind of whiskers that they use to detect stuff. And that'll be kind of appear in their first few days of life. And then they'll be ejected from that pouch. So they will remain in the den for their first 3 months, and then it's typically venturing out the den around October, November, and then kind of become independent by January. So it's about a yearly cycle. Yeah, really, really cool animals. But yeah, and another thing as well, juveniles tend to be more crepuscular than adults. So it's probably they try to come out a little bit earlier and a little bit later to kind of just avoid the adults at night, potentially. And also studies that shows that translocated devils that were orphaned or raised in captivity that consistently engage with new experiences when they're in captivity survive better in the wild. So a lot of reintroductions with Tasmanian Devil. But yeah, we'll get into these guys. So we don't know what caused their extinction on mainland Australia. Oh, that's not what we wanted. Most likely climate change, because Australia got quite dry during the end of the Pleistocene or even in the Holocene. But it could have been the introduction of people and dingoes that could have been a big issue. But now, typically, they only survive in Australia. And they did pretty well in Australia until people came, but there has been some really big population declines recently. There's been 2 mainly ones because of in the mid-1990s, it was estimated to be about 130,000 to 150,000 devils. That's thought to be an overestimate. Most recent estimates suggest to be about 20 to 50,000 mature individuals, and some have even put as low as about 10 to 15,000. But they are a protected species, thankfully. And a lot of that is due to culling as well. The first European settlers kind of ate Tasmanian devils, and they would have killed them for obviously eating on their dogs. It's very similar to the thylacine, but kind of the extinction of the thylacine kind of led to these guys being protected. They were protected in about 1936, and the numbers had been recovering. But things like road mortality is a big issue for these guys, so they get run over because they like to come over and eat on roadkill, and then that turns out they get run over. That's a big issue for death. There's also the devil facial tumor disease, which was first seen in 1996, and that can impact as many as 80% of. There's been lots of population decline. About 20 to 80% of the devil population has declined because of this disease. So this is kind of a viral disease that basically gets in them as they bite each other, and because they're quite good at biting each other and stuff as they fight over carcasses, it can get into their system and create these large tumors, and that's really caused decline. And wild populations are being monitored because of this, and that's why there's a lot of relocations trying to reintroduce them to areas where there is no. They're trying to start up populations that are kind of devil facial tumor free. So, like in mainland Australia, as I mentioned, Oceania is doing islands like Phillip Islands and things like that, where they one of the islands as well is where they got rid of all the little blue penguins. That's an example. They're trying to create populations that are isolated from this disease. So, if anything happened, like the population went extinct because of this disease, they can reintroduce devils that are kind of free of this disease to help the population. But yeah, really, really interesting in that regard. So there's a lot of breeding activity for them as well. There's often people believe that these guys will eat humans, but that's not true. But they can be quite biteful, and some people have even tried to like tame them. And people do keep them in zoos. People like them because they're just such an interesting animal, and lots of zoos will breed them as well. Because of that conservation need, they'll breed and release. So babies will go to the wild and things like that as well. And they're kept in zoos all over the world. There's one in Copenhagen, San Diego Zoo, Auckland Zoo has them, Wellington Zoo as well, and New Zealand have them. St. Louis Zoo and Toledo Zoo and Forthwoods Children's Zoo in America have them as well. And they're quite associated with Australia. You know, Tassie from like the Looney Tunes. There's the Hobart Devils are actually the national basketball league in Australia, which is quite interesting. But yeah, really, really cool animals. You can hear the little screeches and stuff going on there. Really, really awesome. So, we're going to have a look at the Zoopedia for these guys. The Tasmanian Devil. Population 10,000, 25,000. Sadly endangered. The population now is restricted to Tasmania, but some of these small islands, and there's a population in New South Wales now that are wild. 1 to 5, so up to 4 males and 5 females. For 4 females. Dominance established by fights into space. Since these guys fight a lot, that's how that tumor spreads. They're promiscuous, so anyone's. Solitary, so all mature offspring will become outsiders. They are confident with humans and know guess kind of their habitat. Their males are slightly bigger, about 66 centimeters long for a male and 55 for a female. 8.7 is kind of weight for a big adult kind of Tasmanian Devil, and 6 for a female. And about 6 to 5 years old, so that's good averages. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty good. Age of sexual maturity is about 3 years. Second year, third year, pretty much they can have babies till they die. About 1 to 4 babies per mating event. Incubation period is about 5 months. Interbirth period is about 12 months. And quite difficult to breed in captivity. So fun fact, a devil's joey weighs about 0.2 grams at birth and is the size of a grain of rice, like most marsupials. They also store fat reserves in their tail, like most marsupials. They can eat up to 40% of their body weight in a day, which is another big fact because these guys are quite good at eating. They've got to eat a lot because they're scavengers for the most part, but they'll do a lot of hunting. Tasmanian devils have the highest bite force in relation to their body mass among mammals. Already mentioned that. They can bite through bone and things like that. Very similar to hyenas and a lot of convergent evolution with them. Tasmanian devils are no same to their scream, which is so loud and unearthly they made early settlers thinking demons were hiding in the bushland. You can hear their kind of sounds. I think they're actually kind of cute. Like them as like a really fun little guy. It's like, it's quite cute. Definitely love devils. Devils are such great animals. And I'm glad there's lots of conservation efforts to protect these guys. So yeah, really, really cool. So next up, we've got last but not least, kind of the highlight of the pack for me, because I've worked with these animals a lot recently. We have got the North Island Brown Kiwi. So look at these little guys. Let's see if we can find the adult one. There's the female there. Look at this wonderful little kiwi. Great animal. So this is the North Island Brown Kiwi, one of the 5 species of kiwi. This is the most common one you'll find in captivity. So most zoos, both in and outside of New Zealand, if you see a kiwi in captivity, 9 times out of 10 it's going to be a North Island Brown Kiwi because it's the most common kiwi in captivity and in the wild. The other 4 species can be seen sporadically in some houses in New Zealand, but mostly it's going to be North Island Brown Kiwis. These guys are widespread across most of the North Island of New Zealand, so up around Northland, and they've been recently reintroduced into Wellington, though there should be a different species of kiwi. But they are the most common. As I mentioned, there's about 35,000 remaining, and they are considered vulnerable by the AUCN. And like other kiwis, they have the record for having the largest egg to body size ratio, which is amazing. So these guys As I mentioned, there's used to be considered all just brown kiwi, but now there's like three species of brown kiwi. There's the North Island brown, there's the South Island brown, and the Orinoco brown kiwi, or kind of called the Raui, is another name for them. Yeah, based on genetic tests, they all split around kind of the middle of the end, late Miocene to Pliocene. But yeah, really, really cool. There's also been some white kiwis seen. There's like piebald and there's a leucistic kind of variant that you can see in the game. But yeah, really, really cool. So in terms of range and habitat, they're typically found around North Island. They can be found in Northland, the peninsula, a lot of the islands, and they've even been reintroduced recently into, as I mentioned, Wellington. And they're quite adaptable. They can be found on farmlands, they've been plantations, but they prefer native forests. And they definitely like the subtropical to temperate forests, typically. And in terms of description, these guys get about 40 centimeters or about 16 inches tall and weigh about 2.8 kilograms for females. Males are a little bit smaller, about 2.2 kilograms. Like most red types, the males are a little bit smaller. As you can see, that plumage here is about rather like a reddish brown. And the only species of kiwi found internationally in zoos. So if you see one in a zoo, like Miami Zoo, or any of the zoos like Copenhagen, things like that, it's going to be a North Island brown kiwi. But in New Zealand, it's 9 times out of 10 because there are a couple places, like I know the Franz Josef Kiwi House has the South Island brown and the Orinoco kiwis that they breed as well. So these guys are, as you can see, kind of probing the ground there. They feed on all sorts of invertebrates, so they feed on many small things. I know there's a population that lives on the west coast of the South Island that have adapted for eating fish, which is quite interesting. And one thing is that they'll use their whiskers as well, so if they're like foraging, they'll typically stick their beak in the ground, especially soft soil. They like to stick their beak in the ground to kind of probe for all sorts of little invertebrates and worms and things. And they often, if you have gone and seen kiwis in the wild, as you walk around, you can hear them sniff. So they go all the time because their their nostrils are right at the end of their beak, unlike most birds, and that can fill up with dirt. So they pretty much every time they get their face out, they need to basically get rid of all that dirt. But yeah, really, really cool. Another cool thing about these guys is how they breed. So as I mentioned, let's look at little babies here. They have the largest egg to body ratio. So that basically means the mother has to lay such a huge egg. But that is a really good strategy for them since they live on an island with not too many predators until recently. But that is really good because the babies are pretty much born fully formed and they don't need to eat for like their first few weeks of life or first couple weeks of life. And typically what happens, the female will lay the egg and then the male will kind of sit on it and monitor it until the baby's born. And the babies are born pretty big and pretty precocial, so they just need to be monitored for a little bit. And then they're out to do what they like. So it's really, really cool. They're pretty much able to leave the nest within a week of age, which is quite interesting. That's the term precocial. And yeah, really, really cool in that regard. So in terms of conservation, they are considered vulnerable, but the main reasons they've kind of gone endangered, as I mentioned, they're quite adaptable in terms of their habitat, but the biggest issue for these guys has been introduced predators, things like stoats, dogs and cats and things like that, which some places has really hurt their populations. So in the wild, about 94% of chicks die in areas where there's places with no pest control, so no 1080 drops, no like trapping or anything. So that's a huge decline. But luckily, there are lots of conservation efforts. So only about 5% of kiwi that are born will make it to their first year of life because of, obviously, the rats and the stoats and the possums and things like that. Those introduced pests, but mainly dogs, cats, and stoats. So what has kind of happened, they typically do 1080 drops, which is a poison that is dropped from helicopters around large areas to kind of... It's a little bit controversial because, poisons and stuff like that, but it's proven to work really well with protecting native birds since most of them are pretty tolerant to the 1080 poison, while the mammals are more susceptible. So the mammals kind of do okay. The mammals are killed by the poison while the birds kind of do okay. And actually studies show that a lot of areas after 1080 drops, the bird life kind of just explodes afterwards because they're not dealing with all these predators. But yeah, really, really cool. There's also things such as Operation Nest Egg, where lots of zoos and kiwi houses and hatcheries around New Zealand, they will kind of take in wild eggs or breed kiwis of their own and kind of put them in enclosures and take care of them until they get to a size. It's typically a size about 1.2 kilograms, where they're too big to get killed by a stoat. So basically, it's almost like a nursery. So basically, take in all the wild kiwis you can, put them in captivity until they're big enough to be back safely defend themselves against stoats and cats, and then they can be released back into the wild. But no matter how big they get, they will always be susceptible to dog attacks. So that's a big issue for a lot of Kiwis. But they are doing okay. There's lots of conservation efforts to protect these guys. So yeah, really, really cool animal. I really do love Kiwis. And it's something I work with. The place that I'm at the moment, we have a Kiwi house. So we've got 2 Kiwis. And it's really nice to see an animal that I've worked with directly, like in the game like this. It's so cool. Really, really awesome. And plus being a New Zealander, it's like national pride. Finally get to see myself in the game. But yeah, anyway... we've got, going to look at the Zoopedia, so population's 10 to 20,000, it's probably a little less, probably up to 35,000. So, natural habitat, you can see that's around Northland, and this is a Taranaki area, the east coast, around there, the Coromandel Peninsula, so quite a wide range. Group size, about 1 to 2, they are solitary birds, but they will live in monogamous pairs. Females are dominant over males, they're like most ratites, they're monogamous. Gregarious, so all mature offspring were tolerated by the group. They are confident with humans and guests can enter their habitat. They are pretty confident with humans. They are pretty aggressive to humans as well. A lot of zookeepers that worked with Kiwis, they'll get their shins kicked out by Kiwis. Sometimes they can be quite aggressive, especially females. Females can be quite aggressive. Typically their size, about 50 centimeters for a male, 55 for a female, a little bit bigger. Life expectancy on average about 30 years. There have been Kiwis that have been released back into the wild from zoos about like 40 years old, even 50 years old, but it's believed that they can live up to 60 years old, so quite a long-lived bird. And on average, about 2.2 kilograms for a male Kiwi and 2.8 for a female, so about 2 to 3 kilograms is about a good weight for a Kiwi. Age of sexual maturity is about 2 years of age, and the age of sexual sterility is unknown, so they probably have babies till they die. Typically have 1 egg per mating event, though sometimes they can have 2, but mainly that's just they can clutch multiple times a year. That's probably why they probably put 1 to 2, but they can only lay 1 egg at a time since it's so huge. Gestation incubation period is about 3 months, and interbirth period is about 1 month, so they are pretty good at turning out babies because the baby's pretty much ready to go as soon as the egg hatch, which is quite cool, and difficult to breed in captivity. And the North Island Brown Kiwi can live up to 40 years, but I mentioned 60. In North Island Brown Kiwis, it's the male that incubates the egg. Yep. They also have vestigial wings and can't fly. Like most of the ratites, they have a small claw on each wing. That is true, and they still have quite vestigial wings, which is quite interesting. We already mentioned as well, they have largest egg size relative to its body weight compared to other birds. I'm not sure that's technically true now. I know there's some other birds, like seabirds, that have pretty big eggs, but it's definitely the most famous example. And this part of the reason why they're endangered is there's no native land predators to New Zealand, so nothing like mammals, so no rats and stoats and things like that. Rats and stoats and dogs and cats are big things for these guys. Most of their predators historically would have been animals such as, for the North Island Brown Kiwi, like asbills, hawks and harriers and things like that. Falcons, potentially, you've got to take a young one. But mainly would have been bird predators that are mainly on site. But these mammalian predators are quite well adapted to smell. These guys are quite loud as well, and they're quite smelly, similar with kakapo, so that's why they're so easy to find for a lot of mammalian predators, while they're adapted to predators that typically rely on vision. So that's part of the reason why they adapted to hunt at night and have kind of dull colors and things like that to make sure they're not very obvious. But yeah, but while they're pest control, up to 94% of all Kiwi chicks die because of human-introduced wildlife or carnivorous pets, such as cats and dogs. So yeah, big issue for these guys. But yeah, and they don't share habitat with anyone. So yeah, really, really awesome pack. I do love seeing the Oceania Pack. I love the theme. Has to be one of the highlights so far. I really love seeing Kiwis in the game finally. I can make a Kiwi house, and I can have little blue penguins and all that. So really filling out the roster. So yeah, really, really awesome. So yeah, really like this pack, so I think I'm going to end the video here. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.